This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today's show with a roundtable discussion about the sale of one of the nation's leading newspapers to one of the world's richest men. On Monday, the Washington Post announced the paper had been purchased by Amazon.com founder and CEO Jeff Bezos. Bezos will pay $250 million for the paper and a number of other publications, less than 1% of his wealth, which is estimated at more than $28 billion. Bezos is a friend of Donald Graham, chief executive of the Washington Post company, whose family has owned the newspaper for 8 decades. Bezos said management of the Washington Post newspaper will remain the same, but it's unclear what changes might be coming. Last year, Bezos was quoted in an interview with the German newspaper Berliner Zeitung saying, quote, "There is one thing I'm certain about. There won't be printed newspapers in 20 years. Maybe as luxury items in some hotels that want to offer them as an extravagant service. Printed papers won't be normal in 20 years.
Critics of the sale have cited Bezos's close ties to the U.S. government. In 2010, Amazon pulled the plug on hosting the WikiLeaks website under heavy political pressure. Earlier this year, Amazon inked a $600 million cloud computing deal with the CIA. For more, we're joined by 3 guests. In Madison, Wisconsin, Bob McChesney is with us, co-founder of Free Press, author of several books on media and politics, including his Digital Disconnect, How Capitalism is Turning the Internet Against Democracy. You can read the first chapter at our website, democracynow.org. He also recently co-authored with John Nichols, Dollarocracy, How the Money and Media Election Complex is Destroying America. Joining us via Democracy Now! Video stream, Jeff Cohen, director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he's also a journalism professor. He's founder of the media watch group FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And here in New York City, Dennis Johnson is with us, co-founder and co-publisher of the book publisher Melville House. He recently wrote an article called The Obama Business Plan, Be Like Amazon. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Bob McChesney, why don't we begin with you in Madison, Wisconsin. Your response to the news that has rocked the industry that Jeff Bezos is the new owner of the Washington Post.
Well, I think what's important is to have a structural understanding and context for this purchase, because the real story, the backstory, is that the value of the Washington Post, like all other news media in this country, has plummeted in the last 5 or 10 years to maybe 1/10, 1/50th of what it was in the late 1990s. And at this point, they aren't wise commercial investments. As the blip you had at the top of the show said, Amy, commercial journalism no longer is profitable. That's why investors are jumping ship. But they still have great political value. Monopoly newspapers, especially the Washington Post in the nation's capital, it might not be a commercially viable undertaking, but it still has tremendous political power. And I think when we understand it that way, that's the appeal of these remaining legacy monopoly newspapers like the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, to wealthy people, is that it won't make them money in the short term on that exact investment, but it gives them great political power to advance their political agenda, which in the case of someone like Jeff Bezos could give him a great deal of money down the road.
And Jeff Cohen, could you respond to the sale of the Washington Post company to Jeff Bezos, and respond also to what Bob McChesney said about how the value of the Washington Post has been declining for several consecutive years, and talk about why Jeff Bezos might have made this purchase?
Well, I think that when Jeff Bezos in that older quote talks about it being a luxury item, printed newspapers, I've got a good feeling, a good sense that Jeff Bezos' Washington Post will not remain a luxury item around Capitol Hill. It may go online heavily, but it's going to stay there at Capitol Hill because Bezos, I think wants that kind of influence in the nation's capital. And I've been reading all this about Bezos' politics, which of course is important when you're a singular owner of a paper as influential as the Washington Post, a paper that actually urged us to get into the invasion of Iraq about a decade ago. But Bezos is like a lot of corporate executives. He's liberal on social policy. He gave money to the pro-gay marriage initiative. But he's very conservative on economic policies that affect the corporation that made him wealthy and powerful. So we learn about Bezos that he's donated money to the initiative in the state of Washington, big money, that was trying to institute a tax, an income tax on the top 1% of people in the state of Washington. It was supported by Bill Gates of Microsoft and Bill Gates' dad. But Bezos was one of the billionaires that put money in to try to stop that. He's conservative on labor policy, and we know what a bad labor policy Amazon has. And the most important thing is the biggest issue facing American journalism in the last month or so has been the surveillance state and these corporations that profit from the surveillance state, because 70% of the intelligence agencies' budgets that come from the taxpayers is delivered to private contractors. And as you guys mentioned, Amazon just brought down a huge CIA contract to provide cloud services, and we know that that's not the only one. They want more contracts.
And Dennis Johnson of Melville House. Why, as a publisher, what are your feelings about Amazon, and then your thoughts about Amazon buying, or Jeff Bezos buying, the Washington Post?
Well, my feelings as a publisher are the same as my feelings as an American. This is a very tough company to deal with, a company that has developed a whole new model for the marketplace of ideas. I mean, something to remember that maybe contributes to what the previous two speakers are talking about is that Amazon has, since its inception, been a company that, one, has avoided tax payments, or collecting sales tax in not only the United States but across the world. And
explain that.
Well, they are, as a retailer, required to collect sales taxes for everything sold on their website. They have not done that since its inception. In fact, Bezos originally tried to start the company and found it in an Indian reservation because he believed it would be a sovereign nation and he wouldn't have to collect any taxes. He founded the company in Seattle because he felt it would do the company the least harm for sales, for having to not collect taxes in the rest of the country. It was kind of a sham the other day when President Obama went down to speak at the warehouse in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was a warehouse that Amazon opened only because they cut a deal with the state to not collect taxes for yet another year. They've never paid taxes in Tennessee to date, and they're not going to for another year or two, but they promised to employ 2,000 people. Those are the jobs that Obama was celebrating, and this is a very damaging policy for a company to have. Obviously, they're also being contested in the UK and elsewhere in Europe for similar policies. The other thing to remember about Amazon is it's a company that feels no pain. They've, as far as I can tell, have never made money. Their quarterly statements are consistently, sales are up to astronomical numbers. They made $15.7 million last quarter alone, but their losses are up every quarter as well. It's a phenomenal track record. In the retail market, how do you compete with that? How, in the book business, how does Barnes & Noble, how do the little indie booksellers compete with a company that can consistently lose money like that? Well, they can't. They just can't. So when you see him taking over the Washington Post and you wonder, is he going to be able to monetize it? Is he going to make it profitable? He probably doesn't care. That's obviously not what it's about. His businesses do not operate as if they intend to make a profit.
But he did make $28 billion. I mean, he's got $28 billion.
Personally, sure. He's a wealthy man, one of the most wealthy men in the country, if not the world. But the company, quarter after quarter after quarter, does not post a profit.
Well, in his letter to employees after he bought the Washington Post, Amazon's Jeff Bezos seemed to try to address any potential conflicts of interest, saying, quote, "The values of the Post do not need changing. The paper's duty will remain to its readers and not to the private interests of its owners." But many people have pointed out that Amazon ranks among the biggest spenders for high technology companies seeking to influence the federal government. Dennis Johnson, could you talk about some of that? The politics of what Amazon's lobbying efforts have been and how this is likely, if at all, to influence what appears in the Post under Bezos.
Well, sure. Coming strictly from the book business, I mean, this is a very transparent move to have made. This is a man who has growing interest in Washington. I mean, look, we just concluded the Department of Justice prosecution of the book industry, a shocking case that seems to fly in the face of what we know about antitrust law in this country. And it was a case that most in the book business feel was orchestrated by Amazon, and indeed Amazon did file the initial complaints that started that case. Well, they won, and when they won, most in the book industry saw this as, we thought Amazon was a monopoly to begin with. Now we feel like, well, it's a government-sanctioned monopoly. Then what happens? Just days after that decision comes down, the President of the United States goes to their warehouse to slap them on the back and say, good job. This is a company that obviously,
well, now that we have this new information, do you think President Obama knew he was buying the Washington Post when he went down last week? Even many of the reporters of the Washington Post who've been interviewed the last few days, everyone seemed shocked.
Yeah, it was a really well-kept secret, but at the same time, other reports are saying that it was probably cut about a month ago.
And given how much information the NSA gathers on us all, it would be hard to believe the president didn't know. You don't think Jeff Bezos never mentioned this in a phone call or an email?
No, who knows? I take it the president knew, but looking just at what happened, the president was down there lauding a company that he says is going to really boost the middle class, and really these are $11 an hour jobs on average. They don't meet the living wage of that part of the country. They were bought via tax avoidance. This is the president's job policy. We're
going to break and come back to this discussion. Dennis Johnson is with us. He is a publisher. The publishing house is Melville House. Robert McChesney is with us, co-founder of Free Press, and Jeff Cohen, Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, a journalism professor and author. This is Democracy Now!